How can a writer craft clear, cohesive transitions? In this lesson, you will learn to write clear, cohesive transitions by using transitional phrases and varying syntax. This is the prompt that we'll be working with rather. So here's our writing process. First, we're going to read our text closely and analyze it. Then we're going to generate and plan. Then we draft and revise. And finally, we edit and publish. In this lesson, we're working specifically on revision. So that's assuming that we already have a draft done. So in 11th and 12th grade students are expected not only to use varied syntax in their writing, mixing simple, compound, complex sentences, but they're also expected to use this varied syntax in their transitions as well. A transition helps move the reader seamlessly from one section of your writing to the next, and readers need to know when the writer has shifted tracks so they can follow along. A common mistake that some writers make is just to use the same transitions over and over, such as however, on the other hand, however, in conclusion. And we don't want to do that. We want to be able to use a mixture of different ways to be able to lead our reader from one section of our writing to the next. So in this lesson, we're going to ask, do the transitions make clear what is a claim, a counterclaim, and evidence? Then we're going to revise transitions, picking appropriate phrasing for each section. And then finally we're going to ask, do the transitions have the same sentence structure? So let's look at this particular piece of our draft. Conversely, Bois does not see a triumph over racism as a possibility. Even though he mentions it as one of the biggest problems, to the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. This indicates that Bois recognizes that hatred is a deep-seated issue, but he focuses instead on the restoration of African Americans' rights. One can infer that Bois asks not for what he sees as impossible, but for a restoration of basic human rights. He concedes that a hatred of blacks is an ongoing problem, that without question, blacks will continue to bear this burden in the name of an historic race. So let's look at the transitions that we have here. Saying conversely, and then this indicates, one can infer, and he concedes. These are the places that I'm transitioning the reader from one place to the other. And also I have this quote, to the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? So when I'm looking at the quote, I notice that it's sort of what we call like an orphan quote, right? It's standing all by itself. There's no introduction to the quote. So one of the ways that I can transition is just talking about like where in the piece that he does it, like in the beginning, or I could say the author explains this by writing is another option. And then I'd ask, is there a difference between a claim and a counterclaim? And I would say in this case, probably that our transitions are pretty good because we have like conversely. So that means like, hey, I'm telling the reader that I'm changing tracks. One can infer, that tells the reader that I'm saying like I'm interpreting this for you. I'm explaining that this is part of our position. So I think that the writer would see definitely that I'm talking specifically about a counterclaim here. So let's fix our first problem, right? Which is where we're just introducing this particular quote by dropping it in and not transitioning it into our writing. And here we go. So remember we talked about one of our options was where does it occur? In his opening paragraph, even with a sympathetic audience listening, he sees no hope in addressing the hatred, writing, to the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. Okay, so now I've introduced the reader to this quote and I've explained to them why that I'm writing it. What does it mean to me? What point am I making? So let's go back and see where we're going to ask ourselves a question about transitioning into explanation. So in this case, I've used several different ways. This indicates, one can infer, he concedes that. Now let's look at the syntax, all right? This is where in the sentence structure does this appear? And it seems that one or two word transition is pretty common in my essay. You're going to see this part where I'm talking about seldom a word, period, in quotation mark. This indicates that I'm doing it again after rights in the second one. One can infer, and then again, human rights, business, stop, and then my transition comes right at the beginning again. He concedes. So I'm like, can I rework it some way so that every time I have a transition, it's not right at the beginning of a sentence? That's what I'm asking myself. Do the transitions have the same sentence structure? So let's see if we can rewrite the first one. Critics of this position may argue that while all of these statements may be true, Dubois does not see a triumph over racism as a possibility. In his opening paragraph, even with a sympathetic audience listening, he sees no hope in addressing the hatred. And he's writing, to the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. This indicates that Dubois recognizes that hatred is a deep-seated issue. However, he focuses instead on the restoration of African Americans' rights. He concedes that a hatred of blacks is an ongoing problem, that without question blacks will continue to bear this burden in the name of an historic race. So you can see here that instead of saying conversely, I set it up a little bit more. Critics of this position may argue that while all of these statements may be true, and then I kept this one, this indicates that, but I combined the next two. So instead of just saying like one can infer, I combine this into a compound complex sentence. And I have my semicolon, however, and a comma. And then I kept this one. So I have, pretty much I have varied syntax at the beginning. I added more to the beginning so that it was more like it was a complex sentence, and then I have my two short transition sentences, and stuck there in the middle, I've made this other transition in the middle. So this is our writing process, and we've been focusing on revision. In this lesson, we asked, do the transitions make clear what is a claim, a counterclaim, evidence, and transitions? We revised transitions, picking appropriate phrasing for each section. And then we asked, do the transitions have the same sentence structure? In this lesson, you have learned to write clear, cohesive transitions by using transitional phrases and varying syntax.